Let's talk about war for a second. When that word pops into your head, what do you see? I bet it's images of explosions, right? Massive battleships slicing through the waves, dogfights in the sky, incredible acts of bravery on the battlefield. We think of weapons as things that destroy. But what if I told you that one of the most powerful, most decisive weapons in the entire Pacific theater during World War II wasn't a weapon at all? What if it was something so ordinary, so completely out of place in a war zone, that its very existence could break an enemy's will to fight? This isn't just some quirky piece of trivia. This is a story that peels back the layers and shows you what real power looks like. And it's hidden in the last place you'd ever think to look. So, let me ask you straight up. What do you think was America's most surprising weapon in the war? Was it the aircraft carriers, those floating cities of steel that projected power across thousands of miles of ocean? Maybe the B-29 Superfortress, a bomber that could fly higher and farther than anything the world had ever seen? Or, of course, the atomic bomb, the terrifying weapon that brought it all to an end. Now, those are the easy answers, the ones we all know. But the answer we're going to uncover today, it's something else entirely. It's an answer that left Japanese military intelligence completely, utterly baffled, and it tells the entire story of the war in a single, unbelievable object. To really get this, you have to travel back in time with me. Let's set the scene. It's March 11th, 1945. Imagine for a moment you're an intelligence officer in the Imperial Japanese Navy working in Tokyo. Your country is on its knees. Your cities are being firebombed into ash. Your once mighty fleet is a collection of rusting hulks at the bottom of the ocean. And you're now sending your best and brightest young men on one-way suicide missions in planes that are barely holding together. Hope isn't just a dwindling resource, it's almost gone. And then, a report from a submarine patrol lands on your desk. And it makes absolutely, positively no sense at all. Now let's just break this down, because the confusion behind these words is palpable. The crew of the submarine I-47, these are professionals. They know every ship in the American fleet by its silhouette. But this was a ghost. First off, a concrete vessel. In an age of steel battleships, that's just bizarre. Second, no armament visible. It's a sitting duck just floating out there in the middle of a war zone. And then the weirdest part, it's covered in what they can only describe as heavy refrigeration equipment. They spotted it near Ulithi Atoll, which at the time was the biggest American naval base on the planet. What in the world was this thing? What was its purpose? And right here, this one bizarre sighting perfectly illustrates the two parallel universes that were colliding in the Pacific in 1945. This wasn't just one war. It was two completely different realities crashing into each other. You've got the Japanese Empire, a nation literally digging up pine tree roots to distill a few drops of fuel, sending out pilots who are suffering from malnutrition, and on the other side, the United States. A country with so much industrial power that it could build and deploy a $1 million mystery ship dedicated to, well, keeping something cold. This goes so much deeper than a simple difference in resources. This was a fundamental clash of realities. I mean, just take a second to absorb the sheer level of desperation on the Japanese side. A nationwide program, a massive civilian effort, was launched just to dig up pine tree roots. It was backbreaking work for hundreds of thousands of people, and the grand total it produced was 3,000 barrels of fuel, total. To give you some perspective, a single U.S. carrier task force could burn through more than that in one day of operations. They were sending pilots on kamikaze missions with barely 50 hours of flight time, pilots who were quite literally starving. And listen to this. This isn't wartime propaganda. This is a direct quote from Captain Minoru Genda. This is the brilliant strategist who planned the attack on Pearl Harbor just a few years earlier. And now he's admitting that his elite pilots, Japan's last real hope, are physically falling apart. They're developing night blindness because they don't have enough to eat. Their bodies are so weak they can't handle the G-forces of combat. Their nation has nothing left to give them. Their bodies are failing them. So while Captain Genza's pilots were literally shaking from weakness, what was that weird concrete ship doing out there at Ulithi Atoll? Well, here it is. It was a floating ice cream factory, and it was built at a cost of $1 million in 1945. In today's money, that's over $17 million. Just let that number sink in for a moment. In the middle of the deadliest war in human history, America spent the modern equivalent of a fortune on a single, unarmed barge designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to make dessert. And the output was just as mind-boggling as the cost. This wasn't some little treat for the admirals. This was a full-blown industrial operation at sea. Forget the smell of gunpowder. Imagine machinery churning out 10 gallons of fresh ice cream every 7 minutes. 500 gallons per shift. That comes out to 5 tons of ice cream every single day from one barge in the middle of the Pacific Ocean during a world war. So now we get to the next part of the story, how this unbelievable, almost absurd truth began to slowly and terrifyingly dawn on the Japanese High Command. It wasn't one single report that did it. It was a series of strange, disconnected clues that, when they were finally pieced together, painted a picture of an enemy that was so powerful they were almost impossible to comprehend. The hints started trickling in after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the biggest naval battle in all of human history. Japanese sailors who were fished out of the water by the very American ships they were trying to sink came back with these bizarre stories. Then, of course, came the official sighting from the I-47 sub. Around the same time, intelligence analysts started noticing these huge shipments of so-called morale supplies on intercepted American manifests. And the final nail in the coffin? Captured kamikaze pilots confirmed the unbelievable. The Americans were maintaining peacetime routines, like regular meal service, even while they were under direct attack. I mean, can you just feel the absolute shock in this sailor's account? Think about the psychological whiplash. One minute, you're in a life-or-death struggle, a battle for your nation's survival. The next, the enemy you were just trying to kill is handing you a frozen dessert. It defied every rule of war they had ever known. It wasn't an act of kindness. It was an act of such supreme, almost casual power that it was deeply, deeply unsettling. So how did the leadership in Tokyo react to all these reports? Well, with complete and total disbelief. Which, you have to admit, was the only rational response. It had to be a trick, right? It had to be code. No sane military on Earth would waste precious shipping space on dessert ingredients during a war. So when they saw ice cream mix on a manifest, obviously it's code for a new type of gunpowder. Chocolate syrup must be a designation for high-grade fuel oil. The alternative, that it was literally ice cream, was just too insane, too demoralizing to even consider. But the evidence just kept piling up, and this quote from Commander Motsutsura Hashimoto, the same man who would later sink the USS Indianapolis, he absolutely nails the dawning horror. It wasn't about the dessert itself, it was about what it represented, the ability to be comfortable during total war. He called it the power to be comfortable during apocalypse. And that was a kind of strength the Japanese military had never even conceived of. And that profound realization, it brings us to the very heart of this story. Because this wasn't just a war of planes and ships and soldiers. At its core, it was a collision of philosophies. It was a war between the power of the human spirit to endure unimaginable suffering and the power of an industrial system so massive that it could make that suffering irrelevant. Just look at this comparison. It's night and day. For the Japanese military, guided by the ancient warrior code of Bushido, hardship was a virtue. Suffering was seen as a tool to purify the soul, to forge a stronger will. They genuinely believed that a superior fighting spirit could overcome any material disadvantage. The American philosophy, the complete polar opposite. Comfort wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon. They believed that well-fed, well-supplied, confident soldiers simply fight better. Logistics and abundance weren't just support for the war effort, they were the war effort. And this wasn't some happy accident of America being a rich country. This was a deliberate, calculated military strategy. And you can see that philosophy laid out plain as day by the commander of the entire Pacific Fleet, Admiral Chester Nimitz, the man who personally approved the ice cream barge project. He understood the psychological game perfectly. Think about the message it sent to his own men. Your country is so powerful, so abundant, that we can guarantee you a small piece of home, a small comfort, even thousands of miles away in the middle of a fight. That knowledge builds a type of confidence that no amount of spiritual training could ever hope to match. When you put the numbers side by side like this, the gap is just impossible to ignore. A Japanese sailor gets a small portion of rice, if it's available. An American sailor gets full, hot meals plus dessert. A Japanese pilot gets maybe 40 or 50 hours of training before being sent out. An American pilot gets over 500. A morale item for a Japanese soldier was a 1,000-stitched belt, a piece of cloth hand-sewn by his mother or sister for spiritual protection. For an American sailor, it was a share of 5 tons of factory-made ice cream. They weren't just fighting a different war, they were living in different centuries. And if the barge wasn't enough to prove the point, you have this story, which is maybe the most surreal, most telling anecdote of the entire war. American B-29 crews on bombing missions deep over the Japanese home islands figured out that they could mix powdered milk and sugar in an empty ammunition can, strap it to the wing of the plane, and let the -50-degree air at 30,000 feet freeze it solid. Just think about that for a second. They were making ice cream while flying over enemy territory on their way to drop bombs. It's an act of such supreme, almost casual dominance, it's just hard to wrap your head around. So where does all this lead? It leads right here to this quote from a captured Japanese officer. After his destroyer was sunk, he was pulled from the water and handed a cup of vanilla ice cream. And he said he began to cry. Not from gratitude, he explained, but from a moment of sudden, gut-wrenching understanding. He realized in that one simple, absurd moment that the war was already over. His country hadn't just been outfought, it had been outproduced, out-resourced, and out-imagined on a scale he never dreamed was possible. And that, right there, is the ultimate takeaway from this whole story. Japan never ran out of brave men. They never ran out of pilots willing to die for their emperor. They had an abundance of spirit and courage and sacrifice. The war ended when their leadership finally, truly comprehended the reality of the enemy they were facing, an enemy that could wage a global war and debate chocolate versus vanilla at the exact same time. The defeat wasn't just on the battlefield. It was a complete psychological shattering of their entire worldview. And you know, this story isn't just some forgotten piece of history. It's still being told today. At the very airbase in Kanoya, Japan, where so many kamikaze pilots took off on their final missions, there was a museum. And in that museum, they display two things right next to each other. On one side, you have a preserved example of a pilot's last meal, a single humble rice ball. And on the other side, a grainy black and white photograph of that $1 million American ice cream barge. The museum's curator says that when young Japanese visitors see those two things together, no other explanation is needed. They just understand. Which leaves all of us with a really challenging question. Not just about history, but about our world right now. Where does true power really come from? Is it found in the strength of the human spirit, the ability to endure incredible hardship and suffering? Or is it found in the collective power of a system, a society, that can create so much abundance, so much security, that its people don't have to endure that hardship in the first place? It's a question about the very nature of strength and progress. And it's a question that, in many ways, the world is still trying to answer.